You should leave.
All right.
Everything is in place.
Proceed. Michael Gibson was 40 years old, and to everyone who met him, he looked like nothing more than a quiet logistics compliance manager from Chicago. Catherine Caldwell's powerful family believed she had married beneath her status. His faded pickup truck, inexpensive watch, and habit of carrying homemade coffee only reinforced that belief. What they didn't know was that Michael had spent years preparing for a moment that no amount of money could stop. Then, Brandon Caldwell shoved him through the mansion's front door into the freezing rain, and before Michael could take another step, 10 black SUVs emerged through the storm, their headlights cutting across the darkness straight toward him. If you're watching from somewhere in the world, let me know your country and your local time in the comments. I always enjoy seeing where these stories reach. And if you enjoy slow-burning stories filled with suspense, unexpected twists, and satisfying justice, consider subscribing so you won't miss tomorrow's story. The alarm on Michael Gibson's nightstand vibrated at exactly 4:45 every weekday morning. It never rang twice. His hand reached for it before the second vibration could wake the neighborhood. The room remained dark, except for the faint orange glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds of the modest two-story home in Naperville, Illinois. He sat quietly on the edge of the bed for a few seconds. Not because he was tired, because every day began the same way, with stillness. The coffee maker downstairs started humming at precisely 4:52. It had been programmed years ago. By 5 o'clock, Michael was dressed in dark khaki pants, a navy work jacket, polished black shoes that had already lasted him 6 years, and the same inexpensive stainless steel watch he wore every day. He picked up the insulated travel mug Catherine had once bought him during their second Christmas together. She hadn't remembered buying it in years. Michael still used it every morning. Outside, the August air carried the cool breeze rolling in from Lake Michigan. His faded blue Ford F-150 waited quietly in the driveway beside Catherine's white Mercedes GLE. The difference between the two vehicles often became a joke whenever her family visited. Michael never responded. The truck started on the first turn of the key. As he pulled onto Interstate 88 toward downtown Chicago, traffic remained light. Construction crews were only beginning to set up orange barrels along the shoulder. He preferred driving before sunrise. Fewer cars, fewer conversations, more time to think. 45 minutes later, he parked inside the employee garage beneath Great Lakes Freight Solutions, a national logistics compliance company occupying 4 floors of a modern glass office building near the Chicago River. The security guard at the entrance looked up from his newspaper. "Morning, Mike." "Morning, Frank." Frank nodded. "You're early again." Michael smiled politely. "I usually am." The exchange lasted less than 10 seconds. It happened nearly every day. By 6 o'clock, Michael was already reviewing transportation audits, supplier certifications, cargo routing reports, and federal shipping regulations. His desk reflected the same order as his personality. No family photographs, no expensive decorations, 1 legal pad, 2 monitors, 3 sharpened pencils placed perfectly parallel. A framed quote sat near the keyboard. "Discipline is doing the right thing when nobody notices." Most employees walked past without reading it. To them, Michael was simply another compliance manager. Dependable, quiet, forgettable. Around 8:30, the office became noisy as employees arrived carrying coffee and breakfast sandwiches. Jason Miller from procurement leaned against Michael's cubicle. "You still driving that old pickup?" Michael looked up from his monitor. "It still gets me here." Jason laughed. "You know bonuses came out last month, right?" They did. "You ever think about buying something newer?" Michael returned to his spreadsheet. "Not really." Jason shrugged. "I guess if it works." Michael simply nodded. The conversation ended there. It almost always did. People eventually stopped trying to impress someone who never competed. Just before lunch, Michael received a brief text message. Family dinner, Saturday. Dad expects everyone there. Catherine, no greeting, no question, only information. Michael stared at the screen for several seconds before typing one word. Understood. He placed the phone face down and returned to work. Across town, Catherine Caldwell stepped out of a luxury elevator inside Caldwell Infrastructure Group headquarters. She wore a tailored charcoal suit, diamond earrings, and carried herself with the confidence expected of Richard Caldwell's daughter. Employees greeted her immediately. Good morning, Ms. Caldwell. Morning. She walked directly into her father's executive conference room overlooking the Chicago skyline. Richard Caldwell stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing reports worth hundreds of millions of dollars. At 68, he remained one of Illinois' most influential construction executives. His company had built highways, airports, hospitals, bridges, and government facilities across the Midwest. Power surrounded him naturally. Money followed. His wife, Eleanor Caldwell, often reminded people that success was visible. She believed expensive watches reflected discipline. Luxury cars reflected intelligence. Exclusive country clubs reflected character. Michael possessed none of those things. To Eleanor, that told her everything she believed she needed to know. Richard closed a folder. Is Michael coming Saturday? Catherine hesitated. Yes, Richard sighed. He's still working that compliance job? Yes. Nothing else. Just one disappointed sound. Catherine noticed it. She always noticed it. Years earlier, she would have defended her husband. Now she simply changed the subject. Brandon Caldwell entered carrying a designer briefcase worth more than Michael's monthly mortgage payment. 36 years old, vice president, confident, loud. Everything Michael was not. He laughed as he dropped into a chair. I saw Mike's truck outside your place last week. Catherine looked up. So, I thought maybe he'd finally traded it. No, Brandon grinned. I've seen landscaping companies driving newer trucks. Richard chuckled softly. Even Eleanor smiled. Catherine forced herself to smile too. It lasted barely a second. Somewhere deep inside, discomfort flickered across her thoughts. It disappeared almost immediately. Meanwhile, Michael finished another report before leaving the office shortly after 5. Rather than taking the interstate home immediately, he stopped at a neighborhood grocery store. He compared prices before selecting vegetables, chicken breasts, and coffee beans on sale. He always shopped with a handwritten list. Never more. Never less. The cashier recognized him. How's your week going? Busy. You always seem calm. Michael smiled. I try. Outside, he loaded the reusable grocery bags into the pickup. A young couple struggled nearby after their sedan refused to start. Without saying much, Michael walked over. Need a jump? The husband looked embarrassed. If you don't mind. Michael connected. The cables waited patiently and the engine started within minutes. The couple thanked him repeatedly. He simply waved before driving away. No photographs, no social media, no story to tell later. Just another ordinary act. By 6:30, he arrived home. The house was quiet. Catherine wouldn't return for another hour. Michael prepared dinner anyway. Grilled chicken, rice, steamed vegetables. Everything was ready before she walked through the front door talking on Bluetooth. Yes, Brandon, I'll tell him. She removed the headset after ending the call. Dad moved dinner to 7 instead of 6. All right? He wants everyone there. I'll be there. She placed her purse on the counter. You could wear something nicer this time. Michael looked at her. I usually wear a suit. I know. She hesitated. I mean, maybe buy a better one. Michael glanced toward the hallway closet where his navy suit hung inside a garment bag. It had been tailored. It fit perfectly. It simply wasn't expensive. This one still fits. Catherine sighed. You know what I mean. Michael remained silent. She opened the refrigerator, poured sparkling water into a glass, then looked back at him. My family notices those things. I know. You don't seem bothered. He thought for a moment. I've learned people usually see what they're looking for. She frowned. What does that mean? It means, he chose his words carefully. If someone decides who you are before speaking to you, nothing you wear changes their mind. Catherine didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her phone as another notification appeared. Dinner continued in silence. Later that evening, Michael stood alone in the garage, wiping rainwater from his old pickup. The paint had faded. One corner of the rear bumper showed rust beginning to form. Most people would have replaced it years ago. Michael checked the tire pressure, topped off the windshield washer fluid, and folded a small emergency blanket back into its storage compartment. Everything had its place. Everything remained ready. Across the street, neighbor Mrs. Henderson smiled while walking her golden retriever. You always take good care of that truck? Michael smiled back. It takes good care of me. She laughed. See you this weekend. Have a good evening. As darkness settled over the Michael closed the garage door. Inside the house, Catherine was already reviewing seating arrangements that Eleanor had texted for Saturday night's family gathering. Michael quietly noticed one small detail. His name had once again been placed at the far end of the table, farthest from Richard, farthest from the conversations that mattered. He folded the printed seating chart once set it back on the kitchen island, and turned off the lights without saying a word. He had spent years letting people underestimate him. Another family dinner would not change that. But somewhere beyond the walls of the Caldwell estate, events already in motion were moving steadily toward a collision that none of them, not even Catherine, could possibly imagine. Saturday arrived beneath a sky that looked unusually heavy for late summer. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had begun gathering over Lake Michigan, drifting steadily toward Chicago's northern suburbs. The weather forecast predicted thunderstorms after sunset, but the Caldwell family had never canceled a gathering because of rain. Their annual dinner was more than a meal. It was a demonstration of power. At exactly 6:18 p.m., Michael turned the faded blue pickup onto the winding roads leading into Lake Forest. The neighborhoods changed gradually. Middle-class homes gave way to gated communities. Brick houses became stone mansions. Front lawns stretched into private parks. Luxury sedans imported SUVs, and sports cars filled long driveways protected by iron gates and security cameras. Michael had driven this road dozens of times over the past 8 years. It never impressed him. The GPS announced the familiar destination. Arriving at Caldwell Estate, the wrought iron entrance gates stood nearly 12 feet tall, decorated with the family's initials in polished bronze. Beyond them, a quarter-mile private driveway curved through rows of perfectly trimmed oak trees before opening to an enormous Georgian-style mansion illuminated by warm exterior lights. A fountain stood in the center of the circular driveway. Water continued flowing despite the approaching storm. 2 valets immediately approached as Michael parked beside a line of luxury vehicles. One young attendant glanced briefly at the aging pickup before asking politely, "Would you like me to park it, sir?" Michael smiled. "I'll take care of it." The attendant nodded. No judgment, just professionalism. Michael appreciated that. He locked the truck himself and walked toward the front entrance carrying only a small overnight bag. Inside, marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers suspended 3 stories above the grand foyer. The scent of fresh lilies mixed with polished oak and expensive cologne. Everything inside the house had been chosen to communicate success. Nothing appeared accidental. A housekeeper accepted Michael's jacket. "Good evening, Mr. Gibson." "Good evening." He thanked her by name. "Thank you, Linda." She smiled. Most guests never remembered her name. Michael always did. The living room had already filled with nearly 30 guests. Executives, political donors, attorneys, developers, bankers. Everyone carried a glass. Everyone seemed to know someone important. Richard Caldwell stood near the fireplace entertaining several businessmen with stories about infrastructure projects throughout Illinois. His voice naturally dominated every conversation. When he noticed Michael entering the room, his smile remained unchanged. Only his enthusiasm faded. Michael. Richard. A firm handshake, brief eye contact, nothing more. Eleanor approached moments later wearing an emerald evening gown and pearls that reflected the chandelier light. You made it. We wouldn't miss family dinner. She glanced subtly toward his suit. The navy fabric had been professionally cleaned and pressed, perfectly tailored. Still, she noticed immediately that it wasn't designer. Traffic wasn't too bad. No. That's fortunate. Her attention drifted away before waiting for another answer. Michael quietly moved toward the refreshment table. Across the room, Catherine was speaking with several friends from college. She looked elegant in a black evening dress, laughing comfortably among people who had known her since childhood. She saw Michael arrive. She smiled politely, not warmly, not coldly, simply politely. Michael noticed the difference. He accepted it without expression. Brandon entered moments later carrying a drink in one hand and a new luxury car key in the other. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced loudly, guess who finally traded in the old Bentley? Several guests looked over. Ryan Harper grinned. What did you get this time? A new Aston Martin. Whistles filled the room. Brandon laughed proudly. I figured life was too short to drive something boring. His eyes shifted toward Michael. Although apparently not everyone agrees. A few guests chuckled. Michael calmly sipped sparkling water. The joke dissolved almost immediately when no reaction came. Brandon seemed slightly disappointed. He enjoyed arguments. Michael never gave him one. Dinner was delayed another 30 minutes while additional guests arrived. Among them was Charles Whitmore, the Caldwell family's longtime attorney. He had represented Richard for nearly 25 years. Gray-haired, impeccably dressed, every movement carefully measured. Michael shook his hand. It's good to see you again. Charles smiled. You too, Michael. Unlike others, Charles never underestimated people openly. His profession had taught him that appearances often concealed uncomfortable truths. Another guest entered shortly afterward. Daniel Foster, Chief Financial Officer of Caldwell Infrastructure Group. He carried a leather portfolio even to a social dinner. Michael recognized him immediately, not from family gatherings, from documents. Several months earlier, while reviewing transportation compliance records inside a secure federal database during confidential assignments outside his ordinary office responsibilities, Michael had encountered Daniel Foster's signature attached to multiple procurement certifications. Perfectly ordinary documents, at least on the surface. Michael said nothing. He simply remembered. Then another arrival. Councilman Stephen Brooks, Chicago suburb, longtime political ally of Richard Caldwell. They embraced like old friends. Michael watched quietly as Brooks accepted a glass of whiskey. During casual conversation, several phrases drifted across the room. State Transportation Committee. Change order approval. Expedited bidding. Nobody questioned the amendment. Most guests ignored the conversation. Michael did not. His expression never changed. Inside his mind, individual details settled carefully into place. Words, names, dates, connections. Not assumptions, observations. That was how he had always worked. Catherine eventually joined him near one of the large windows overlooking the gardens. You've been quiet. I usually am. She glanced toward Brandon, entertaining another group. My brother can be a little much. Michael smiled faintly. He enjoys attention. You could joke back once in a while. I don't think he'd enjoy that nearly as much. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she looked toward her father. Dad wants tonight to go well. I'm sure it will. She lowered her voice. Just avoid talking business. Michael looked at her. I wasn't planning to. She nodded, appearing relieved. What Catherine didn't realize was that Michael had absolutely no intention of discussing business. Listening was far more valuable. A bell rang softly through the mansion. Dinner was ready. Guests slowly entered the formal dining room. The table stretched nearly 40 feet beneath another crystal chandelier. Every place setting had handwritten name cards. Michael found his seat exactly where he expected, at the far end, beside Linda's service entrance, across from Ryan Harper, farthest from Richard Caldwell. The arrangement wasn't accidental. It never had been. As everyone settled into their chairs, servers began pouring wine. Michael requested water instead. Brandon noticed immediately. No wine tonight. I'm driving. Ryan smirked. Still driving that antique pickup Fuhn. It gets me where I need to go. Ryan leaned back. I guess reliability matters more than appearance. Michael answered calmly. Usually. For a brief second, Ryan wasn't sure whether he'd been complimented or corrected. The first course arrived. Conversation shifted naturally toward business. Richard stood to make a brief announcement. I want to thank everyone for another remarkable year. Glasses lifted around the table. Caldwell Infrastructure has secured 3 additional municipal transportation projects worth nearly $1.2 billion. Applause followed. Brandon smiled proudly. Richard continued. With the support of trusted partners and dedicated leadership, our family business will continue building the future of Illinois. Another round of applause. Michael quietly observed Daniel Foster exchange a quick glance with Councilman Brooks. Less than 2 seconds. Barely noticeable. Yet something about it felt rehearsed. A folded envelope briefly slid beneath Daniel's portfolio before disappearing again. Michael noticed. No one else appeared to. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the darkening sky. The mansion windows vibrated almost imperceptibly. Rain had not yet begun, but the storm was moving closer. Michael lifted his water glass. Across the table, Charles Whitmore looked directly at him, for only a brief moment. Neither man spoke. Neither smiled. Yet something passed silently between them. Recognition. Not friendship, recognition. The first drops of rain finally struck the tall dining room windows. Inside, laughter continued. Outside, the storm had begun. And somewhere beneath the polished conversations, hidden beneath years of wealth, influence, and carefully maintained appearances. Michael realized with absolute certainty that this family dinner had become something far more dangerous than anyone seated around the table could possibly understand. The rain began as a whisper against the mansion windows. Within minutes, it became a steady rhythm that echoed through the formal dining room. Lightning flashed beyond the tall glass panes, briefly illuminating the rows of oak trees lining the long driveway. Every few seconds, thunder rolled across Lake Forest with enough force to rattle the crystal hanging above the table. Inside, dinner continued as though nothing outside mattered. The main course had just been served. Prime-aged filet mignon, roasted asparagus, fingerling potatoes. Imported red wine flowed freely from bottle to bottle. Michael quietly cut his steak into even pieces, listening far more than speaking. Richard Caldwell set down his fork. I've been thinking. The conversations around the table gradually faded. I've spent 40 years building this company. Several guests nodded respectfully. It didn't happen because people waited for opportunities. He looked around the room. It happened because this family earned its place. More nods followed. Richard raised his glass slightly. Every person sitting here contributes something valuable. His eyes eventually stopped on Michael. Some more than others. Silence settled over the table. Michael slowly placed his knife beside his plate. He looked directly at Richard. His expression remained calm. Richard leaned back comfortably. Michael. Yes. What exactly do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? The question sounded harmless. It wasn't. Several guests exchanged knowing smiles. Michael answered without hesitation. I'll continue doing meaningful work. Richard smiled politely. Meaningful? Yes. Brandon chuckled. Dad asked what you'll actually be doing. Michael turned toward him. The same thing. Ryan Harper laughed loudly. You've got to admit that's vague. Michael shrugged slightly. Some work isn't measured by titles. Brandon took another sip of wine. Or salaries. Several people laughed. Michael did not. Richard folded his hands together. You've been part of this family for 8 years. That's right. I still couldn't explain to anyone what you actually accomplish. I work in compliance. Brandon rolled his eyes dramatically. There it is again. Ryan leaned forward. Compliance for what? Transportation operations. Ryan smirked. So, paperwork. Michael nodded once. Among other responsibilities. Brandon looked around the table. I've always wondered something. Nobody interrupted him. If your job is so important... He paused deliberately. Why are you still driving that old truck? Laughter spread around the room. Not everyone joined in. Charles Whitmore remained silent. Daniel Foster stared into his wine. Michael answered simply. Because it still works. Brandon laughed harder. I knew he'd say that. Eleanor carefully placed her napkin beside her plate. Michael? Yes, Eleanor. I hope you don't take this personally. He waited. Catherine has always deserved the very best. I agree. We imagined she'd marry someone. She searched for the word. More established. The room grew noticeably quieter. Michael looked toward Catherine. She lowered her eyes to her plate. Not defending him, not disagreeing, simply avoiding the moment. Richard spoke again. No father wants to see his daughter struggle, Michael answered calmly. Catherine has never struggled because of me, Brandon interrupted. Maybe not financially. Michael looked at him. But socially, Ryan added. You don't exactly fit in with this crowd. Michael remained composed. I've never tried to. Another flash of lightning lit the dining room. Thunder followed almost instantly. Outside, heavy rain battered the windows. Inside, the temperature seemed to fall anyway. Richard folded his napkin. I've always believed marriage should strengthen a family. Michael listened. Catherine had opportunities. He gestured subtly around the room. Doctors, attorneys, successful executives. Instead, his eyes settled on Michael again. She married a man nobody here truly understands. Michael answered quietly. That's probably true. Brandon laughed. Finally. At least we agree on something. Michael took another sip of water. He offered nothing else. That frustrated Brandon more than any argument could have. He wanted emotion. He wanted anger. He wanted a scene. Instead, Michael remained exactly as he always had. Calm, measured, present. Ryan decided to continue. So tell us. Michael looked at him. How much is that truck worth now? I've never checked. I'll guess. Ryan pretended to calculate. Maybe $4,000? Several guests smiled awkwardly. Michael answered. Something like that. Brandon spread his arms dramatically. My watch costs more. Michael glanced briefly at the expensive timepiece. I'm glad you enjoy it. Again, No reaction, no embarrassment, nothing. The absence of resistance only made Brandon more aggressive. He pushed his chair back. "You know what bothers me?" Nobody answered. "You act like you're above all this." Michael shook his head. "No. You never defend yourself. I don't always need to." Brandon stepped closer. "Or maybe you can't." Michael remained seated. His breathing never changed. Catherine finally looked up. "Brandon..." But she didn't finish the sentence. Richard raised one hand slightly. Let him continue. Michael noticed. So did Charles Whitmore. Brandon stopped beside Michael's chair. "You know what everyone thinks?" Michael looked up at him. "They think you're living off my sister." Silence. No response. Ryan joined in. "Honestly, that's how it looks." Michael answered. "Appearances can be incomplete." Brandon laughed. "That's a fancy way of saying nothing." He picked up Michael's inexpensive stainless steel watch from beside the dinner plate, where Michael had briefly removed it before washing his hands earlier. He held it between two fingers. "This thing probably came from a discount store." Michael extended his hand calmly. "I'd appreciate having it back." Instead of returning it, Brandon placed it on the table with an exaggerated clatter. "You should buy yourself something respectable." Michael quietly picked it up. He fastened it back around his wrist. No anger, no raised voice, only quiet precision. Eleanor finally spoke again. "Catherine?" Everyone turned toward her. "Are you happy?" The question lingered in the room. Catherine hesitated longer than Michael expected. Finally, she answered. She looked toward Michael, then toward her parents. "I don't know anymore." Those 6 words carried more weight than everything else said that evening. Michael heard them clearly. His face revealed almost nothing, only the slightest tightening around his eyes. Richard nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty." Brandon crossed his arms. "I think we've all been pretending for years." Ryan agreed. "Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable." Michael finally stood, not abruptly, not dramatically. He simply rose from his chair. "I think I'll head home." Richard's voice stopped him. "Perhaps that's best." Michael looked toward Catherine. She did not meet his eyes. Instead, she stared at the untouched dessert being placed at the center of the table. Richard continued. "I don't believe you should come to future family meetings." Michael listened quietly. "Our business discussions require people who belong." The words settled over the room. Nobody challenged them, not even Catherine. Michael picked up his overnight bag from beside the dining room entrance. He placed his suit jacket over one arm. "I understand." He began walking toward the foyer. Brandon followed. "I'll help." "There isn't any need." "I insist." The tone made it clear this wasn't an offer. As they reached the front entrance, Brandon grabbed the overnight bag before Michael could reach for it. The zipper opened. A change of clothes, a shaving kit, a paperback novel. Nothing else. Brandon smirked. "That's all?" Michael calmly took the bag back. "That's enough." The front doors opened. Cold wind rushed into the foyer. Rain blew across the marble floor. Catherine finally walked into the entrance hall behind them. Michael looked at her one last time. "If you'd like to come home..." She interrupted before he finished. "I think you should leave." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Those 6 words landed harder than any insult spoken all evening. Michael held her gaze for several seconds. Then he nodded once. "All right." Brandon stepped forward and placed one hand firmly against Michael's shoulder. The shove wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. It carried just enough force to send Michael backward onto the soaked stone steps outside the mansion. Rain immediately drenched his suit. The overnight bag struck the wet pavement beside him. The heavy front doors closed. The sound echoed through the storm. Michael slowly stood. Water streamed from his jacket. His watch continued ticking. Behind the tall windows, silhouettes gathered to watch him walk away. No one opened the door. No one called his name. He adjusted the strap of his bag and began walking down the long driveway beneath sheets of rain. Halfway to the gates, lightning split the sky overhead. Seconds later, another sound emerged through the storm. Low, steady, growing louder. Michael stopped walking. Far beyond the entrance gates, 10 pairs of headlights appeared through the curtain of rain, one after another, perfectly spaced, moving with deliberate precision toward the estate. The convoy had arrived. The convoy did not slow until it reached Michael. 10 black Chevrolet Suburbans rolled through the open gates in perfect formation, their headlights cutting white tunnels through the sheets of rain. The windshield wipers moved in synchronized rhythm. Engines idled with a quiet confidence that spoke of planning rather than urgency. Michael stopped walking. Rain streamed from his jacket and dripped from the overnight bag in his hand. He did not wave. He did not signal. He simply waited. The lead SUV came to a precise stop beside him. The driver's door opened first. A tall man wearing a dark raincoat stepped into the storm. He scanned the grounds before opening the rear passenger door. A woman in a navy suit emerged, carrying a waterproof document case beneath one arm. The second SUV stopped. Then the third. Doors opened almost simultaneously. Men and women wearing jackets marked with small federal identification patches stepped into the rain. None of them rushed. Every movement followed an obvious plan. Inside the mansion, several guests had moved toward the enormous front windows. Brandon pressed one hand against the glass. "What the hell is that?" Ryan narrowed his eyes. "Private security?" Richard frowned. "No." Charles Whitmore quietly stood from his chair. He did not move toward the windows immediately. Instead, he watched Michael. Only Michael. Outside, the woman carrying the document case approached. She stopped 3 feet away. "Mr. Gibson." Her tone was formal. "Good evening, Ms. Bennett." Assistant United States Attorney Olivia Bennett extended her hand. Michael shook it. "I'm sorry the weather couldn't cooperate." "It rarely does when timing matters." She nodded once. "Everything is in place." "It appears so." Special Agent Marcus Reed joined them, removing a waterproof folder from beneath his coat. "Evening, Michael." "Marcus." "Long walk." Michael glanced back toward the mansion. "Long enough." Marcus followed his gaze. "I assume they don't know." "They don't." Inspector David Morales from the Department of Transportation stepped beside them. "The remaining teams are in position." Michael asked one question. "Any complications?" Morales shook his head. "None." "Communications?" "Secure." "Warrant confirmations?" "Signed within the hour." Michael nodded. "Good." Nothing about the exchange sounded dramatic. No raised voices, no excitement. Just professionals confirming procedures. Olivia Bennett opened the waterproof case. Inside rested multiple folders sealed inside clear protective sleeves. She handed one to Michael. "The originals." He quickly reviewed the first page, despite the rain. United States District Court, Northern District of Illinois. Federal search warrants, judicial signatures, timestamps, addresses, everything exactly as expected. He closed the folder. "No corrections." Marcus Reed looked toward the remaining vehicles. "Your operation." Michael finally straightened his posture. The quiet husband who had walked away from the Caldwell mansion moments earlier seemed to disappear. His voice became sharper, more deliberate, more precise. "Team 1 secures the executive offices." Marcus nodded. "Already assigned." "Team 2 handles digital evidence." "Confirmed." Team 3 documents financial records before movement, Morales answered. They're ready. No devices leave the property until cataloged. Understood. Every interaction recorded. Olivia smiled slightly. As always. Rain continued falling around. Michael looked once more toward the illuminated mansion. Several silhouettes remained visible behind the front windows, watching, guessing, completely unaware. Inside, Brandon laughed nervously. I knew it. Ryan turned toward him. Knew what? He got himself into trouble. Richard adjusted his glasses. Perhaps someone's suing him. Eleanor folded her arms. I told Catherine that ordinary people often bring ordinary problems. Catherine remained silent. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. She watched Michael speaking confidently with people who clearly respected him. That alone was unfamiliar. She had never seen strangers treat her husband with that level of professional regard. Charles Whitmore quietly walked toward Richard. Richard. What? I think everyone should remain calm. Richard frowned. Why? Charles answered carefully. I don't believe those are private investigators. Before Richard could ask another question, the mansion's front doorbell rang. Not once. 3 measured chimes. Linda, the housekeeper, looked toward Richard. He nodded. Answer it. She crossed the marble foyer and opened the massive wooden doors. Olivia Bennett stood outside, beneath a black umbrella. Marcus Reed remained beside her. Behind them, several federal agents waited silently. Good evening. Linda hesitated. May I help you? Olivia presented her credentials. My name is Olivia Bennett, Assistant United States Attorney. Marcus displayed his badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Linda instinctively stepped backward. Richard was already approaching. What is this? Olivia looked directly at him. Richard Caldwell. Yes. She removed several documents from the waterproof folder. We have federal search warrants for this residence and associated properties. Silence. Complete silence. Even the storm seemed quieter. Richard stared at the paperwork. There must be some mistake. There isn't. Marcus stepped forward. We ask that everyone remain inside the residence until instructions are given. Brandon forced a laugh. This is ridiculous. No one answered him. Richard finally looked beyond the agents. His eyes found Michael standing near the driveway, still soaked, still holding his overnight bag. Except now every federal official seemed to be waiting for him. Richard frowned. What does he have to do with this? Marcus turned slightly. Mr. Gibson? Michael walked towards the entrance without hurrying. Rain continued dripping from his sleeves. As he reached the front steps, every agent standing outside instinctively shifted aside, leaving a clear path. Olivia handed him another folder. Michael signed one page with a waterproof pen. Marcus waited. So, we're proceeding. Michael looked over the final authorization. He closed the folder. Proceed. One word. Nothing loud, nothing theatrical. Yet the response immediately set dozens of people into motion. Agents began speaking quietly into communication earpieces. Vehicles opened. Evidence cases emerged. Digital forensic kits, camera equipment, evidence seals, document containers. Everything had been prepared long before anyone arrived. Brandon looked from one agent to another, then back to Michael. No, his voice cracked. No way. Ryan whispered, What is happening? Catherine felt her heartbeat accelerate. She had spent years believing Michael worked a quiet, corporate job. Nothing about this scene matched that belief. Absolutely nothing. Richard stepped toward the doorway. I demand an explanation. Olivia answered before Michael could. You'll receive one after the warrants have been executed. Richard pointed towards Michael. Who exactly is he? Marcus Reed looked at Richard with complete professionalism. Mr. Gibson serves as the senior federal compliance coordinator assigned to this multi-agency investigation. No one inside the mansion spoke. Not immediately. The sentence seemed impossible. Brandon laughed once, a hollow sound. That's impossible. Marcus simply looked at him. Nothing about tonight is accidental. Charles Whitmore slowly removed his glasses. His shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. Perhaps he had suspected something. Perhaps only fragments. But now the entire picture stood before him. Catherine stared at Michael. The quiet man who carried homemade coffee. The husband she had asked to buy a more expensive suit. The man her family had just pushed into the rain. He never looked toward her. His attention remained on the operation. Team 1. His voice carried clearly across the entrance hall. Begin with the executive office. Team 2. Secure every electronic storage device. Team 3. No documents leave any room before photographic documentation. Every instruction came naturally. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Agents acknowledged each order with brief responses before moving into the mansion. The operation had officially begun. Standing beneath the pouring rain, Michael calmly adjusted the cuff of his soaked jacket, glanced once toward the dark sky, and followed the first investigative team through the front door, not as the unwanted son-in-law who had been thrown out minutes earlier, but as the man now directing the investigation that would determine the future of everyone inside the house. The first evidence technician crossed the threshold at exactly 8:17 p.m. A digital timestamp flashed across the body camera attached to the agent's vest. Every movement inside the Caldwell estate would now become part of the official record. Michael remained just inside the entrance hall while the teams dispersed according to the operational plan that had been rehearsed for months. His soaked jacket clung to his shoulders, but he paid no attention to it. Team 1 executive office. Moving. Team 2 server room. Confirmed. Team 3 financial archives. Proceeding. The responses came through discreet earpieces with disciplined precision. No one raised their voice. No one hurried. Years of preparation left little room for improvisation. Richard Caldwell watched in disbelief as 2 agents placed evidence seals across the doors leading to his private study. You can't simply walk into my office. Olivia Bennett calmly handed him a copy of the warrant. The court has already authorized us to do exactly that. Richard barely glanced at the paperwork. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Marcus Reed answered before Olivia could. We know exactly who we're dealing with. The statement lingered in the foyer. Brandon stepped forward. This is harassment. No, Olivia replied evenly. This is a federal investigation. Ryan Harper reached for his phone. I'll call our attorneys. You are free to contact legal counsel, Marcus said. Please leave all electronic devices where they are until they have been documented. Ryan froze. What? An evidence technician approached politely. Sir, I'll need your phone for imaging before it is returned. This is insane. No, the technician answered. It's standard procedure. Michael observed everything without interruption. He had learned long ago that investigations were strongest when facts spoke louder than personalities. The shouting would come. The accusations would come. None of them changed documents. None of them altered timestamps. None of them erased accounting records. He looked toward the grand staircase. 2 agents were already photographing framed awards displayed along the walls. Large contracts, government commendations, photographs with governors, senators, and mayors. Every image documented, every room catalogued. Nothing was overlooked. His attention shifted for only a moment. 8 years earlier, he had climbed those same stairs carrying wedding gifts after marrying Catherine. Richard had proudly shown him the library, the wine cellar, the indoor pool, the theater room. At the time, Michael had admired the craftsmanship. He had never admired the wealth itself. Money never impressed him. Order did. Integrity did. Commitment did. The size of a house had never revealed the size of someone's character. A voice interrupted his thoughts. "Michael." He turned. Marcus Reed approached quietly. "The command vehicle is requesting confirmation." Michael nodded. "Let's step outside." The rain had softened to a steady drizzle. Inside the lead SUV, several large monitors displayed floor plans of the estate, evidence logs, communication channels, and synchronized timestamps. A digital map identified every investigative team. Green indicators showed completed assignments. Amber indicated searches in progress. Michael reviewed the display carefully. Everything appeared exactly as planned. Marcus handed him a tablet. "Judge Ellison signed the final supplemental authorization at 6:42. Michael reviewed the electronic signature. "Any objections from the defense before execution?" "None." "Media?" "They haven't been notified." "Good." Marcus smiled faintly. "You always preferred silence. It keeps evidence cleaner." Marcus leaned against the open vehicle door. "You know." He looked towards the mansion. "They had no idea." Michael followed his gaze. "No." "They really believed you were just—" Marcus searched for the word. Ordinary," Michael answered quietly. "I am ordinary." Marcus laughed once. "Most ordinary people don't spend 4 years coordinating 27 agencies." Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he watched raindrops slide across the windshield. "The work matters." Marcus nodded. "Not the title?" "Exactly." For a few seconds, neither man spoke. The operation continued around them. Michael's thoughts drifted backward. 4 years earlier, a conference room inside the Everett M. Dirksen Federal Building in downtown Chicago. No windows, gray walls, a single secure projector. Representatives from multiple federal agencies had gathered around a long table. Transportation, Treasury, the FBI, the Department of Justice, Inspectors General, procurement specialists, financial analysts. The investigation already contained thousands of pages. Yet something remained missing. Patterns existed. Proof did not. Michael remembered the first briefing. Assistant U.S. Attorney Bennett had pointed toward a map of Illinois. "We believe several infrastructure contracts have been manipulated over the last decade." One investigator asked, "How extensive?" Olivia had answered honestly. "We don't know." Another voice. "What do we need?" She looked directly at Michael. "Someone who understands compliance systems better than politics." Michael had accepted the assignment without asking who might eventually become involved. Names were irrelevant. Evidence came first. The work required patience. Documents had to be obtained legally. Every subpoena carefully reviewed. Every financial transfer independently verified. Every witness interviewed twice, sometimes 3 times. Months passed before isolated irregularities became recognizable patterns. A vendor appearing under different corporate names. Invoices submitted minutes apart. Contract amendments approved unusually quickly. Repeated payments flowing through shell companies. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just numbers, dates, signatures, small details, thousands of them. Michael had spent countless evenings reviewing procurement spreadsheets inside secure federal offices after finishing his regular workday. Few people knew. They couldn't. Confidentiality agreements prohibited even casual conversations. When Catherine occasionally asked why he worked late, he simply answered, "Quarter-end reporting." It wasn't a lie. It simply wasn't the whole truth. He never imagined where the evidence would eventually lead. Then, one afternoon, nearly 18 months into the investigation, a familiar company name appeared inside a procurement file. Caldwell Infrastructure Group. Michael had stared at the screen for several seconds. He requested another analyst independently verify the data, then another. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Personal relationships demanded even greater caution. he immediately disclosed his marriage to Olivia Bennett. "I need to recuse myself if necessary." Olivia reviewed the circumstances. "You've had no involvement with their business, correct? No access to confidential family records, correct? No financial interest, none." She consulted the ethics office. 3 days later, the determination arrived. Michael could remain assigned because his role involved interagency coordination rather than evidence generation directly concerning family members. Additional oversight would be added. Every decision would require secondary approval. Michael accepted without complaint. If anything, he became even more careful. Every meeting generated written notes. Every instruction required witnesses. Every communication entered secure logs. He would rather delay the investigation than risk compromising it. Back in the present, Marcus interrupted his thoughts. "You're thinking about the beginning." Michael smiled faintly. "The first spreadsheet." Marcus laughed. "I was thinking about tonight." Michael looked toward the mansion. "I've been thinking about both." An agent approached the SUV. "Sir?" Michael turned. "We located the executive office. And the room is larger than expected." Michael nodded. "It usually is. We've already identified 6 desktop systems, 2 encrypted servers, and 3 locked filing cabinets. Photograph everything before opening anything. Already in progress." The agent hesitated. "There is one more thing." "What?" "We found a hidden door behind the bookshelf." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Michael. "Does it match the architectural plans?" Michael immediately remembered the original blueprints he had reviewed months earlier. The dimensions had never aligned perfectly. There had been unused square footage, a space that officially didn't exist. His expression remained calm. "It matches." Marcus asked, "Your recommendation?" Michael answered without hesitation. "No one enters until the forensic documentation team arrives." "Understood." The agent hurried back toward the mansion. Marcus looked at Michael again. "Looks like the night just became more interesting." Michael watched another flash of lightning illuminate the estate. He had spent years preparing for this operation, years making sure every decision could withstand scrutiny in court, years allowing people to underestimate him while quietly building a foundation of evidence. The hidden room suggested that the investigation was about to enter an entirely new phase, and whatever waited behind that concealed door had remained hidden for a very long time. The hidden door was nearly invisible, built into a wall of handcrafted walnut bookshelves inside Richard Caldwell's private office. Its outline disappeared behind rows of leather-bound law books and framed photographs with governors, senators, and corporate executives. Only after forensic laser measurements were compared against the original architectural plans did the dimensions reveal a void where no room officially existed. No one touched the handle. Michael stood several feet away while the forensic photography team documented every angle. "Photographs complete," the lead technician reported. "Thermal scan?" Michael asked. "Completed. Fingerprints on the visible surface." "In progress." Marcus Reed glanced toward the concealed entrance. "Ready when you are." Michael looked at Olivia Bennett. "Any objections from legal?" She shook her head. "The warrant covers concealed storage areas." Michael nodded once. "Open it." A locksmith assigned to the federal team stepped forward. Instead of forcing the door, he examined the locking mechanism first. "It isn't electronic." He removed a small inspection light. "Mechanical deadbolt." 2 minutes later, the lock released with a quiet, metallic click. The room beyond remained dark. No one entered immediately. Flashlights illuminated the interior first. Concrete walls, steel shelving, climate-controlled ventilation, no windows. Marcus let out a slow breath. "So they built a vault." The evidence team crossed the threshold. Within seconds, the lead technician called out, "Multiple document boxes." Another voice followed. "External hard drives." A third. "2 secure file safes." Michael remained outside the room. He had learned years earlier that investigators often became too eager after a major discovery. Excitement led to mistakes. Mistakes weakened cases. Catalog before movement, he reminded everyone. Every box received an evidence marker. Every shelf was photographed from multiple angles. The technicians dictated serial numbers into body microphones. Nothing moved until its original location had been preserved. Richard watched from the hallway. His face had changed. For the first time that evening, confidence gave way to uncertainty. He looked toward Charles Whitmore. "Say something." Charles remained silent. "I hired you." Charles finally answered. "I represent your legal interests." "Then stop this." "I can't." Richard stared at him. "Why not?" "Because a federal warrant isn't an argument." Brandon paced across the foyer. "This is ridiculous." He pointed toward Michael. He planned this." Marcus looked directly at him. "This investigation began years before tonight." "Liar," Michael answered calmly. "No." Brandon laughed bitterly. "You expect us to believe that's a coincidence?" Michael met his eyes. "I don't expect you to believe anything." He paused. "I expect the evidence to speak." The sentence lingered in the room. Catherine had not moved since the agents entered. She stood near the staircase, watching Michael issue quiet instructions, with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. She searched his face for anger. She found none. She searched for satisfaction. She found none. He looked exactly as he had every morning before leaving for work. Focused, disciplined, professional. That realization unsettled her more than the search itself. Had she ever really known what her husband did? Had she ever asked beyond polite conversation? She remembered dozens of evenings when he came home tired. She had assumed spreadsheets, routine audits, ordinary office work. Now she wondered how many of those late nights had actually been spent preparing for moments like this. An evidence technician emerged from the hidden room carrying a sealed, transparent bag. Inside rested several encrypted solid-state drives. "Recovered from Shelf B." Another technician followed. "Original accounting ledgers dated back 12 years. Marcus looked toward Michael. 12. Michael simply nodded. "Continue." In the library, another team examined filing cabinets that had already been unlocked. Color-coded folders filled every drawer. Government contracts, bid proposals, consulting agreements, inspection reports. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly organized. That was precisely what experienced investigators expected. Fraud rarely looked chaotic. The most sophisticated schemes were often meticulously documented. The lead forensic accountant carefully compared several binders. "Michael." He walked over. "What do you have?" The accountant pointed toward 2 nearly identical invoices. "Same project." Michael studied them. One invoice listed a bridge rehabilitation project outside Rockford. The second carried the same project number, same amount, same approval date, different subcontractor, different routing number. He examined the signatures. "They're not originals." "You think they're copied?" "I think one was generated from the other." The accountant smiled slightly. "That's what I thought." Michael handed the documents back. "Keep them separated." Nearby, another investigator called out, "We've located backup accounting servers." Marcus joined the team. 3 black server towers stood inside a locked, climate-controlled closet. Indicator lights continued blinking steadily. The systems were still running. "No one powers them down," Michael instructed. "Forensic imaging first." The digital specialist nodded. "We'll capture volatile memory before shutdown." Across the hall, Ryan Harper grew increasingly nervous. He whispered to Brandon. "They're taking everything," Brandon whispered back. "They won't find anything." Neither sounded convinced. Olivia Bennett quietly reviewed an evidence log. Every item received a barcode. Every barcode matched a digital chain of custody record. No shortcuts. Defense attorneys would examine every procedural step months from now. Michael intended to leave them nothing to challenge. Rain continued tapping softly against the tall windows. The violence of the storm had passed. Only steady rainfall remained. Inside the mansion, however, pressure continued building. One of the younger agents approached Michael carrying a thin black notebook. "We found this inside Richard's desk." Michael accepted it using evidence gloves. No title, no company logo, just black leather. He opened the cover. Inside appeared handwritten initials beside dates, columns of numbers, cities, project codes, no explanatory notes. The entries seemed meaningless, yet something about the handwriting caught his attention. Not because of what it said, because of what it omitted. "No dollar signs," he observed. The forensic accountant looked over. "You're right. Only numerical values." Marcus frowned. "Code? Possibly." Michael closed the notebook. "Send it to financial analysis." The accountant smiled. "You think it's a key? I think someone wrote it expecting only one audience." "Who?" Michael looked toward Richard. "The person who wrote it." Linda, the longtime housekeeper, quietly approached Olivia Bennett. "Excuse me." Olivia turned. "Yes. I don't know if it matters." "What is it?" Linda hesitated. "Mr. Caldwell always told us never to clean one storage room above the garage." Marcus immediately looked toward Michael. "The detached guest garage." Michael remembered the property survey. "There was a locked storage area." Linda nodded. "Only Mr. Caldwell had the key." Olivia asked gently, "Has anyone entered it recently?" "I don't know." Michael thanked her. "You've been very helpful." She lowered her eyes. "I only answered your questions." Michael understood. People often believed witnesses had to deliver dramatic revelations. Most investigations moved forward because ordinary people simply described what they had seen. Nothing more, nothing less. An FBI agent entered the foyer. "Command update." Marcus turned. "Go ahead." "We've completed preliminary imaging of the executive servers." "And?" The agent handed him a printed inventory. Marcus scanned the list before passing it to Michael. Michael read silently. Multiple encrypted accounting databases, archived email repositories, external contractor communications, automatic backup schedules, everything appeared intact. He handed the report back. "Excellent." Marcus noticed one small line near the bottom. "What's this?" Michael looked again. "A scheduled remote synchronization. Every Friday night. Destination unavailable. External location not identified." He read the twice, then a third time. The hidden room had revealed years of records. The servers contained thousands of files. Yet somewhere outside the estate, another destination still existed. Another repository, another copy. Michael folded the inventory carefully. He looked toward Marcus. "We're not finished." Marcus understood immediately. "You think there's another archive?" Michael's answer came quietly. "I don't think." He tapped the synchronization entry. "I know." The discovery changed the entire investigation. Somewhere beyond the Caldwell mansion, beyond the storm, beyond the evidence already stacked inside dozens of federal containers, another collection of records was still waiting to be found. And whoever controlled that archive might already know the search had begun. The synchronization log changed the atmosphere inside the command vehicle. Until that moment, every discovery had reinforced what investigators already suspected. The hidden office, the ledgers, the encrypted drives, and the handwritten notebook all strengthened an existing case. The remote synchronization schedule suggested something different. Someone had built a contingency. Michael studied the report one more time before handing it back to Marcus Reed. How old is the synchronization entry? Marcus checked the metadata. It was modified 34 days ago. Frequency: every Friday at 9:30 p.m. Michael glanced at his watch. It read 8:51. We have less than 40 minutes. Marcus immediately understood the implication. If that destination is still active, someone could overwrite records. Michael finished. Olivia Bennett stepped into the vehicle. We've contacted the magistrate. Michael looked up. For a supplemental warrant? Already being prepared? He nodded. Good. An analyst wearing headphones turned toward them. We traced part of the network route. Where does it go? Marcus asked. The analyst frowned. Not directly. What do you mean? It bounces through 2 commercial cloud providers before disappearing behind a private encrypted tunnel. Michael folded his arms. That wasn't built by accident. The analyst enlarged the network diagram. We recovered one clue. A storage identifier. 16 random characters. 1 registered location. Northbrook, Illinois. Marcus looked at Michael. Office building. Maybe. Warehouse. Maybe. Michael stared at the identifier. Then something small surfaced in his memory. Not from the investigation, from dinner. Daniel Foster. His leather portfolio, the folded envelope, the conversation about construction schedules. Another detail followed. Linda's statement. The detached guest garage. Michael spoke quietly. The garage. Marcus looked confused. You think they're connected? I don't know. But Richard never trusted only one hiding place. Olivia considered the possibility. You think the garage contains directions? Or access? Marcus immediately called another team. Garage unit status. The reply came seconds later. Exterior complete. Interior. Still documenting. Michael took the radio. This is Gibson. Go ahead. Search for maintenance records. Vehicle files. Property maps. Network equipment. And anything that doesn't belong in a storage room. Understood? The transmission ended. Back inside the mansion, technicians continued cataloging evidence. Every hallway contained yellow evidence markers. Every major room had become a controlled work area. The elegant estate no longer resembled the stage for a wealthy family gathering. It looked like an organized forensic laboratory. Catherine sat alone in the breakfast room overlooking the gardens. No one had instructed her to remain there. She simply no longer knew where she belonged. From the doorway, she watched Michael crossing the hallway with 2 investigators. His suit remained damp from the storm. His shoes still carried traces of mud from the driveway. Yet every person he passed greeted him professionally. Not because of rank alone, because they trusted him. That realization hurt more deeply than she expected. She remembered countless mornings teasing him for leaving before sunrise. You work too much. He would simply smile. It'll be worth it. She had assumed he meant promotions, performance reviews, annual bonuses. Now she understood those mornings had carried a different purpose entirely. He had never been chasing recognition. He had been protecting an investigation. She lowered her head. A memory surfaced. Nearly 2 years earlier, she had asked why he kept 2 phones. He had answered gently. One belongs to work. She had rolled her eyes. You're not that important. He hadn't defended himself. He had quietly changed the subject. The memory now felt unbearable. A sudden voice interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Gibson? She looked up. It was Olivia Bennett. I need to ask you several routine questions. Catherine nodded slowly. I'll cooperate. Olivia sat across from her. When was the last time you entered your father's executive office? Months. Did you ever use the hidden room? Catherine blinked. There was a hidden room. Olivia watched her carefully. The surprise appeared genuine. I've never seen one. Were you aware of off-site storage facilities? No. Did your husband ever discuss this investigation with you? The answer came immediately. Never. Olivia closed the notebook. I believe you. Meanwhile, in the detached guest garage, another discovery was unfolding. The building appeared ordinary: 2 guest parking bays, a small workshop, storage cabinets filled with gardening equipment, boxes labeled Christmas decorations, old patio furniture, nothing unusual, until one technician opened a locked metal cabinet bolted to the rear wall. Inside sat a commercial-grade network switch, fiber optic connections, backup battery systems, cooling fans. The equipment clearly did not belong in a residential garage. The supervising agent immediately called Michael. We found infrastructure. What kind? Networking. Michael arrived minutes later. He examined the installation. Dust covered the exterior. Not the cables. Someone had serviced them recently. He crouched beside the cabinet. A single indicator light blinked green. Active. He looked toward the digital forensic specialist. Isolate it. The specialist connected a portable analyzer. No outbound interruption. Good. Several seconds passed. The screen populated with connection records, remote authentication logs, encrypted tunnels, automatic backup schedules. Then one line appeared. Destination alias, Lake Secondary. Michael smiled for the first time that evening. Not because the investigation was over, because the puzzle had finally begun fitting together. The specialist continued reading. Secondary location established 3 years ago. Marcus arrived just in time to hear it. Can you identify the physical address? Working. Another minute passed. Then the software resolved a registration file. Not a warehouse, not an office. A climate-controlled commercial storage facility in Northbrook, Unit C-118. Olivia received the update through her earpiece. The supplemental warrant just came through. Michael accepted the electronic authorization. He reviewed every page carefully. Everything is covered. Marcus looked toward the waiting convoy. I can have a team there in 20 minutes. Michael shook his head. No. Marcus frowned. No. We all go. The evidence chain stays together. Marcus understood. One investigation, one command structure, no unnecessary risks. Within minutes, the operation shifted. Half the investigative teams remained at the Caldwell estate. The others began loading sealed evidence containers into designated vehicles. Every transfer was documented, every seal photographed, every signature recorded. Richard watched from the foyer as agents carried out boxes from his office. He looked toward Michael. You've already taken everything, Michael answered evenly. We've only collected what the warrant authorizes. Richard's voice hardened. You think you've won? Michael met his eyes. This isn't about winning. Then what is it about the truth? Richard laughed bitterly. You'll never find all of it. Michael paused. Those words confirmed more than Richard intended. He simply replied, We'll keep looking. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Clouds drifted east towards the lake. The driveway glistened beneath rows of security lights. The convoy prepared to leave once again. This time, however, its destination was no longer the Caldwell mansion. It was a quiet, commercial storage complex nearly 30 miles away. If Michael's instincts were correct, Unit C-118 contained something even more valuable than the ledgers already recovered. Not more money, not more contracts, something capable of connecting every separate piece of evidence into one complete picture. And somewhere without yet realizing it, the person responsible for maintaining that hidden archive was already on the move. By sunrise on Sunday, the story had spread far beyond Lake Forest. Helicopters hovered above the Caldwell estate before dawn. Television crews gathered outside the entrance gates. Satellite trucks lined the opposite side of the road. Reporters stood beneath umbrellas speaking into cameras as rainwater still dripped from the trees. No official statements had been released. That only fueled speculation. Federal agents executed multiple search warrants overnight. Authorities have not disclosed the full scope of the investigation. Sources indicate the operation involves public infrastructure contracts. Every network repeated the same few confirmed facts. No one mentioned Michael Gibson by name. Not yet. Inside the temporary command center established in a federal office building in downtown Chicago, dozens of investigators worked quietly through the evidence recovered overnight. The atmosphere was remarkably calm. Rows of bankers' boxes sat on long tables. Evidence tags hung from sealed containers. Digital forensic specialists cloned hard drives one after another, preserving every byte before beginning analysis. Michael walked slowly between the workstations with a legal pad in one hand. He never interrupted anyone who was concentrating. He simply stopped long enough to ask one question. Anything unusual? Most answers were the same. Still processing. Nothing conclusive yet. Waiting for decryption? He accepted each response without impatience. Years of experience had taught him that evidence had its own pace. Trying to rush it usually created mistakes. Marcus Reed joined him near the digital lab. The storage unit is being cataloged. Michael nodded. How much? 27 additional archive boxes. Any surprises? Marcus handed him a preliminary inventory. Corporate formation documents, historical accounting ledgers, contract correspondence, backup media, several handwritten appointment books. Michael scanned the list. Every category strengthened the timeline already developing. Nothing looked dramatic on its own. Together, however, the documents formed a pattern stretching back more than a decade. Olivia Bennett entered carrying fresh coffee. We've received 3 requests from national media. Michael looked up briefly. For interviews? Yes. And? I declined. Michael smiled faintly. Thank you. Olivia handed him a cup. They seem especially interested in you. I'd rather they stay interested in the evidence. She nodded. They'll learn your name soon enough. Across Chicago, the headquarters of Caldwell Infrastructure Group remained closed. Employees arriving for work found federal notices posted across the main entrance. Operations had been suspended pending court orders affecting financial records and electronic systems. Small groups gathered on the sidewalk. Nobody seemed to know exactly what had happened. I heard the IRS showed up. No, it was the FBI. I thought it was about campaign money. My cousin says they're investigating bridge contracts. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. Several longtime employees refused to speculate. They simply waited. Inside one nearby coffee shop, 2 project managers watched television coverage in silence. One finally spoke. I never thought I'd see this. The other nodded. Neither did I. What do you think happens now? The older manager looked down at his coffee. I think people start telling the truth. Back at the Caldwell estate, the atmosphere had changed completely. The elegant mansion no longer felt like the center of a powerful family. It felt strangely empty. Evidence markers still remained in several rooms. Federal seals covered selected doors. Richard Caldwell sat alone in the library. For the first time in decades, there was no assistant waiting outside. No executive meetings, no ringing phones, only silence. Across the hall, Catherine slowly walked through the dining room where the previous night's dinner had ended. Most of the plates had already been cleared. Only faint marks remained on the polished table where wine glasses had rested. She stopped beside the chair where Michael had quietly eaten dinner. She remembered Brandon laughing, Ryan making jokes, her father's questions, her own silence. She reached toward the back of the chair but withdrew her hand before touching it. The memory refused to leave. Michael had never raised his voice, not once. Yet somehow he had left with more dignity than everyone who had stayed behind. The realization settled heavily inside her. Meanwhile, Brandon sat inside the family office staring at his phone. Messages continued arriving every few minutes. Friends asking questions, business partners requesting meetings, unknown numbers calling repeatedly. He answered none of them. For years he had believed influence solved every problem. Now influence seemed strangely absent. Ryan Harper entered quietly. They froze another account. Brandon looked up sharply. What? Our outside counsel just called. Brandon stood. They can't do that. Ryan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed Brandon a printed notice received from the company's attorneys. Brandon read every line. His face gradually lost its color. For the first time, the consequences no longer felt theoretical. Across town, Great Lakes Freight Solutions opened for business as usual. Employees gathered around televisions in the break room. Jason Miller recognized the Caldwell Company logo immediately. Isn't that where Mike's wife works? Someone nodded. I think so. Another employee shrugged. Poor guy. Frank, the security guard, folded his newspaper. You know what's funny? Everyone looked toward him. I've watched Mike come through that front door almost every morning for years. So, Frank smiled. He never acted like he had anything to prove. Jason stared at the television. I guess we never really knew him. No, Frank replied quietly. We only knew what he chose to show us. By afternoon, Michael returned briefly to his ordinary office. Not because he had to, because routine helped him think. His desk looked exactly as he had left it. 3 pencils aligned, legal pad centered, computer monitor asleep. Nothing suggested that less than 24 hours earlier, he had coordinated one of the largest federal operations in recent Illinois history. Jason cautiously approached. Mike? Michael looked up. Morning. Jason hesitated. I saw the news. Michael nodded. So did I. Jason shifted awkwardly. I guess I owe you an apology. Michael waited. I used to joke about your truck. Michael smiled politely. It's all right. No, Jason shook his head. It wasn't. Michael closed the file he had been reading. People make assumptions. I made too many. Michael stood and picked up his coffee. What matters is what you do after you recognize them. Jason looked genuinely embarrassed. I'll remember that. Michael nodded once before returning to work. He never mentioned the apology again. Late that afternoon, Olivia Bennett entered his office carrying a sealed envelope. The grand jury has reviewed the preliminary evidence. Michael accepted it. He opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single memorandum authorizing the next phase of proceedings. No celebration followed, no dramatic announcement, only another step in a process built on patience. Olivia watched him finish reading. You're not surprised? I expected the evidence to stand. It did. She paused. There will be indictments. Michael looked out the office window toward the Chicago skyline. Clouds were beginning to break apart. For the first time since the storm, sunlight reflected across the river. He folded the memorandum and placed it inside his briefcase. The investigation had survived its most difficult night. Now it was about to enter a stage where evidence would no longer remain inside secure boxes. Soon, every accusation would be tested in open court, where facts, not reputation, wealth, or influence would decide what happened next. The first federal hearing began on a gray Monday morning, 3 weeks later. The Everett M. Dirksen United States Courthouse stood quietly above the Chicago streets as attorneys, reporters, and court employees passed through security. Television cameras remained outside the building. Inside, the atmosphere was remarkably restrained. Federal courtrooms rewarded preparation, not performance. Michael arrived 25 minutes early. He wore the same navy suit he had worn to the Caldwell dinner. The same stainless steel watch rested beneath his shirt cuff. The same black leather briefcase accompanied him through the security checkpoint. One of the deputy marshals recognized him. "Morning, Mr. Gibson." "Good morning." "You'll be in courtroom 12. "Thank you." Michael walked down the marble hallway without slowing. He had testified before. He understood the rhythm of federal proceedings. Facts, questions, answers. Nothing more. Inside courtroom 12. Assistant United States Attorney Olivia Bennett reviewed her notes one final time. She looked up as Michael entered. "Everything ready?" He nodded. "Everything we've submitted has been independently verified." She smiled. "That's why I asked." Marcus Reed stood near the prosecution table, organizing exhibit binders. Each binder contained carefully indexed evidence: contract records, bank transfers, meeting calendars, procurement files, email chains. Nothing had been placed inside unless another piece of evidence confirmed it. Michael appreciated that discipline. Large investigations often failed because someone became impatient. This one had been built differently. At the defense table, Richard Caldwell entered with two senior attorneys from a nationally known law firm. Brandon followed several steps behind. Ryan Harper sat beside his own counsel. None of them looked toward Michael. Richard finally broke the silence. "I suppose this is where your little performance begins?" Michael calmly met his eyes. "This isn't a performance." Richard looked away. The courtroom gradually filled. Corporate observers, journalists, former employees, members of the public. Catherine entered quietly and chose a seat near the back. She wore a simple, dark suit instead of the expensive designer clothing she usually favored. For the first time in years, she seemed almost invisible. That suited her. She wanted to observe. Nothing else. At precisely 9 o'clock, the courtroom deputy announced the judge. "All rise." Judge Eleanor Hastings entered with measured steps before taking her seat. Everyone remained standing until instructed otherwise. "Please be seated." The hearing began, and without ceremony. Olivia Bennett stood first. "Your Honor, the United States moves to unseal the indictment and proceed with arraignment." Defense counsel immediately responded. "We object to several characterizations contained within the government's filing." Judge Hastings adjusted her glasses. "We'll address those individually." For nearly an hour, procedural matters dominated the courtroom. Scheduling, evidence disclosure, discovery deadlines, protective orders. No dramatic speeches. No emotional confrontations. Michael remained quietly attentive. He had spent years helping build the investigation. Now the legal system followed its own carefully structured pace. Eventually, one defense attorney stood. "Your Honor, much of the government's investigation appears to revolve around Mr. Michael Gibson." Olivia remained silent. The attorney continued. "We believe personal marital conflict influenced investigative judgment." Several reporters immediately began writing. Judge Hastings looked toward Olivia. Response. Olivia rose. The government anticipated this argument. She handed several documents to the courtroom deputy. "These are conflict disclosures filed voluntarily by Mr. Gibson nearly 2 years before execution of the search warrants." Copies reached the judge. She reviewed them carefully. Michael recognized every page. His original ethics disclosures, written the day Caldwell Infrastructure first appeared in the investigation. Judge Hastings continued reading. Independent supervisory approvals, ethics committee review, secondary oversight assignments, mandatory documentation requirements. Every safeguard had been implemented. She looked toward the defense. "The record reflects extensive conflict management." The defense attorney tried again. "Nevertheless," the judge interrupted gently, "the existence of a family relationship does not invalidate documented evidence." She placed the papers on the bench. "Continue." The attorney changed direction. "We also question whether investigators interpreted ordinary business practices as criminal conduct." Olivia nodded. "We expected that question as well." She approached the evidence monitor. Government Exhibit 21. A digital timeline appeared. Every contract, every payment, every amendment, every approval. Each entry linked to independently verified records obtained from different sources. Bank records, municipal archives, vendor invoices, electronic communications. Nothing depended upon one witness alone. Nothing depended upon Michael's opinion. The timeline spoke for itself. Olivia addressed the court. The government will demonstrate not isolated mistakes, but repeated patterns occurring across multiple projects over several years. The judge studied the display. Defense counsel watched silently. The visual chronology made one fact increasingly difficult to ignore. The same names, the same companies, the same financial pathways, again and again and again. Michael observed without satisfaction. Evidence was never personal. It either held together under scrutiny or it didn't. This evidence had been tested for years. During a brief recess, several reporters gathered outside the courtroom doors. No cameras were permitted inside. Questions nevertheless filled the hallway. "Mr. Gibson," he continued walking, "did you know your wife's family was under investigation before the search?" No response. "Do you regret marrying into the Caldwell family?" Michael stopped for only a moment. He looked toward the reporters. "I won't discuss pending litigation." Then he continued down the corridor. One younger reporter lowered her notebook. "That's it." An older journalist standing nearby smiled. "That's all you're going to get." Back inside the courtroom, the afternoon session focused on financial records. Daniel Foster entered under subpoena. He appeared noticeably older than he had at the family dinner. His shoulders slumped. His answers came carefully. He confirmed his position, confirmed his responsibilities, confirmed his signature on numerous procurement documents. Defense counsel attempted to establish routine accounting practices. Olivia then presented 2 invoices. Same project, same approval date, different subcontractors, different payment destinations. Daniel examined both documents. They shouldn't both exist. Olivia nodded. Yet they do. She displayed corresponding bank transfers. Daniel remained silent. Several long seconds passed. Finally, he answered. "I can't explain that." Olivia asked no further questions. She didn't need to. The documents had already answered. Later that afternoon, another witness authenticated electronic server records recovered from the hidden room. A forensic examiner described imaging procedures, chain of custody, hash verification, data preservation. Every technical safeguard had been followed. The defense questioned each step carefully. The examiner answered each question without hesitation. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been added. Nothing had been removed. Judge Hastings occasionally wrote notes, but rarely interrupted. Michael respected that. Careful judges often asked fewer questions because they listened more closely. As the day neared its conclusion, Olivia approached the bench once more. "The government requests that all existing evidence preservation orders remain in effect." Defense counsel objected briefly. Judge Hastings considered both arguments. Then she ruled. "The request is granted." Her gavel struck softly. The hearing ended. Outside the courthouse, reporters rushed toward everyone leaving the building. Richard Caldwell ignored every question. Brandon entered a waiting vehicle without speaking. Ryan covered his face with a folder. Catherine paused briefly on the courthouse steps. She watched Michael emerge several minutes later. He carried the same briefcase, walked at the same steady pace, spoke quietly with Marcus Reed before heading towards the parking garage. She considered calling his name. Instead, she remained silent. Some distances could not be crossed by a single conversation. Michael unlocked his old pickup truck. The paint still looked faded beneath the afternoon sunlight. He placed the briefcase inside. Before climbing into the driver's seat, his phone vibrated. A secure message from Olivia Bennett. One sentence, "Another cooperating witness has requested to testify." Michael read it twice before locking the phone. The first day in court had gone exactly as preparation suggested. But if another insider was ready to speak under oath, the government's case was about to become stronger than anyone had anticipated. The courthouse felt different on the second week of hearings. The first days had been dominated by documents, contracts, financial transfers, electronic records. Now the witnesses began arriving. Facts written on paper could establish a pattern. People who had lived inside that pattern could explain how it had been allowed to continue. Michael arrived before sunrise, carrying 2 binders that he had reviewed 3 times the previous evening. Nothing inside surprised him. That was intentional. Surprises belonged in fiction. Courtrooms depended on preparation. Marcus Reed joined him outside the security checkpoint. "You sleep at all?" Michael smiled faintly. "Enough." Marcus laughed. "You've said that every day. And it's been true every day." They entered the building together. Olivia Bennett was already inside courtroom 12, arranging exhibits in chronological order. She looked up. "Our first witness has arrived." Michael nodded. "How is he?" "Nervous." "That's expected." She lowered her voice. "But he's ready." The witness was Thomas Granger. For nearly 15 years, he had served as a regional procurement director for Caldwell Infrastructure Group. He had resigned 18 months earlier. Until recently, almost no one outside the company had known why. When court began, Judge Hastings called the proceedings to order. Thomas walked slowly to the witness stand. He appeared exhausted. Gray circles surrounded his eyes. His suit fit well enough, but the confidence of an experienced executive had disappeared. After taking the oath, he answered routine questions about his education, employment history, and responsibilities. Then Olivia reached the point everyone had been waiting for. "Mr. Granger, what was your role in reviewing subcontractor bids?" "I supervised regional evaluations." "Were the lowest qualified bidders always selected?" Thomas hesitated. "No." "Why not?" "Because sometimes the decision had already been made." The courtroom became noticeably quieter. Olivia displayed a procurement chart. "Who made those decisions?" Thomas took a slow breath. "Senior leadership." "Can you be more specific?" "Richard Caldwell approved certain projects personally." Defense counsel immediately objected. "Speculation," Olivia answered calmly. "The witness is describing actions he personally observed." Judge Hastings nodded. "The objection is overruled." Thomas continued. "There were meetings before official committee reviews." "What happened during those meetings?" "We received lists." "What kind of lists?" "Approved contractors." Olivia walked toward the evidence screen. "Were those contractors always the most qualified?" "No." "Were they always the lowest bidders?" "No." Thomas lowered his eyes. "Sometimes they weren't even close." Olivia presented several emails already authenticated through forensic examination. Thomas identified them one after another. Meeting invitations, approval requests, budget revisions. Every document connected another small piece of the investigation. Michael watched quietly from the prosecution table. He never looked toward Richard. Instead, he focused on the witness. People rarely lied convincingly for several hours under careful questioning. Truth had a different rhythm. It carried uncertainty, memory, occasional pauses. Thomas displayed all of them. After nearly 2 hours, the defense began cross-examination. Their strategy became obvious immediately. Mr. Granger had accepted immunity in exchange for truthful testimony. The defense hoped to portray him as someone blaming others to save himself. "Mr. Granger," one attorney began, "you violated company policies yourself, correct?" "Yes." "So you're hardly an example of integrity." Thomas answered without anger. "No." "You committed misconduct." "Yes." "You benefited financially." "For a time." The attorney stepped closer. "And now you expect this jury to trust you?" Thomas looked toward the jurors before answering. "No." The attorney paused. I expect them to examine the documents. Several jurors looked up from their notebooks. The answer had not been rehearsed. Michael could tell. It was simply honest. Cross-examination ended shortly afterward. During the lunch recess, Catherine sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria. She barely touched the sandwich in front of her. Every witness seemed to reveal another version of the company she thought she had known. She remembered childhood dinners where Richard proudly described building schools, hospitals, and highways. She had believed every word. Perhaps some of it had been true, perhaps most of it. Yet somewhere along the way, something had changed. Or perhaps she had simply never been allowed to see the whole picture. Across the room, she noticed Michael standing near a coffee machine, speaking quietly with Marcus. Neither man appeared excited. Neither celebrated successful testimony. They discussed schedules, evidence. The next witness, professional, measured. She suddenly remembered another conversation years earlier. Michael had once told her, "The strongest case is the one that doesn't need emotion." She had laughed. She understood those words now. The afternoon session introduced financial analysts from the Department of the Treasury. Instead of accusations, they presented charts. Money entered one company. Minutes later, it moved through another. Then another. Eventually, portions returned to entities connected to projects already funded with public money. The diagrams looked complicated. The explanation was not. Funds repeatedly circulated through businesses that performed little or no documented work. Olivia avoided dramatic language. She asked short questions. The analysts answered clearly. One juror requested permission to examine an enlarged chart during a break. Judge Hastings approved the request. Michael appreciated that. Jurors who wanted to understand details often paid closer attention throughout a trial. Late in the afternoon, another witness entered. Harold Simmons, owner of a small family construction company outside Joliet. Unlike previous witnesses, Harold had never worked for Caldwell Infrastructure. He had competed against them. Olivia greeted him respectfully. "Mr. Simmons, how long has your company existed?" 32 years. Did you regularly bid on public infrastructure projects? We did. Were you successful? Sometimes. She displayed a series of bid summaries. Harold recognized each one. My company submitted lower bids on all 5. Did you receive any contracts? No. Did anyone explain why? Harold shook his head. We kept hearing the same phrase. What phrase? Administrative considerations. Olivia waited. Did anyone ever privately tell you something different? Harold hesitated before answering. Yes. Who? A former project manager. What did he say? He said the decisions were already made before bidding officially closed. Defense counsel objected immediately. Hearsay. Judge Hastings sustained the objection. Olivia nodded without frustration. She simply moved on. The point had already been established through documentary evidence. She didn't need the statement. After court adjourned, Michael returned to the federal office instead of going home. Evidence continued arriving. Additional witness interviews had been scheduled. The investigation never truly paused. Marcus entered carrying another folder. You'll want to see this. Michael accepted it. Inside were notes from investigators interviewing former accounting employees. One paragraph caught his attention. A retired payroll supervisor remembered monthly meetings held off-site, not at company headquarters, not at the estate, at a private conference room inside an old hotel near O'Hare International Airport. Michael read the paragraph again. What dates? Marcus pointed toward the schedule. Mostly the first Monday of each month. Michael opened another binder. Meeting calendars recovered from the hidden room. He compared dates, one by one, every first Monday. Several executives showed recurring calendar blocks labeled simply Regional Review. No location. No agenda. Only 2 words. Regional Review. Michael closed the binder. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked. "I think we've been looking at financial records." Marcus waited. "But every financial decision begins with a meeting." Marcus nodded slowly. "You think somebody else attended?" Michael looked toward the courthouse, visible through the office window. "We've identified money." He tapped the calendar. "Now we identify everyone sitting around the table." As evening settled over Chicago, another storm rolled across the western horizon. Nothing like the violent night outside the Caldwell estate, just distant thunder. A reminder. The evidence had dismantled much of the company's public image. Former executives had begun speaking. Independent contractors had confirmed irregularities. Financial experts had connected years of transactions, yet Michael understood the investigation was still incomplete. The missing piece was no longer hidden in a storage room or locked behind encrypted drives. It was hidden inside the memories of people who had quietly attended meetings for years. And somewhere among those names, one witness remained capable of transforming a strong case into an undeniable one. 6 months later, the courtroom was quieter than it had ever been. The rows once filled with reporters now contained only a handful of journalists taking notes. The frenzy surrounding the investigation had faded. Public attention had moved on to newer headlines. The legal process had not. It continued exactly as it was designed to, patiently, methodically. Every motion had been argued, every witness examined, every financial record challenged, every chain of custody reviewed. Nothing had been rushed. Michael preferred it that way. Justice built on speed rarely lasted. Justice built on careful proof often did. Judge Eleanor Hastings entered the courtroom at precisely 9 o'clock. Everyone stood. The defendants occupied the same seats they had used throughout the proceedings. Richard Caldwell looked noticeably older than he had on the night of the family dinner. His shoulders had rounded. The confidence that once filled every room had been replaced by quiet exhaustion. Brandon sat beside his attorneys, staring at the defense table. Ryan Harper avoided looking toward anyone. Catherine remained in the last row of the gallery. She had attended nearly every hearing. She never spoke to reporters. She never tried to approach Michael. She simply listened. Judge Hastings adjusted the papers before her. "The court is prepared to issue its findings." Silence settled over the courtroom. The judge began reading. She summarized months of testimony, government procurement procedures, financial transfers, corporate records, independent forensic examinations, witness credibility. Every conclusion referred back to documented evidence, not assumptions, not opinions, documents, verified records, corroborated testimony. Nearly 40 minutes passed before she reached the final section. The court finds that the government has established a sustained pattern of fraudulent conduct relating to multiple public infrastructure contracts. No one reacted. The courtroom remained still. She continued. The evidence demonstrates repeated misuse of public funds through coordinated procurement manipulation, false invoicing, and concealed financial transfers. Another pause. Accordingly, judgment is entered consistent with the jury's verdict. The words were delivered without emotion. That was their strength. Richard slowly closed his eyes. Brandon lowered his head. Ryan exhaled quietly. Michael remained seated. His expression did not change. Olivia Bennett leaned toward him. "It's over," Michael answered softly. "The trial is." She understood. The consequences would continue for years. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered once more. This time they already knew the outcome. Questions focused on sentencing, financial recovery, and the future of Caldwell Infrastructure Group. Government receivers had already begun supervising company assets. Several ongoing construction projects would continue under independent management to avoid disrupting hospitals, bridges, and public transportation improvements. Michael appreciated that decision. Workers who had done honest jobs should not lose their livelihoods because of executives' misconduct. That distinction mattered. Inside another courtroom, several floors above, attorneys discussed restitution, municipal governments, taxpayers, subcontractors who had never received full payment, small businesses that had lost legitimate opportunities. The numbers filled hundreds of pages. Michael reviewed only the summaries. Money could be counted. Trust was more difficult to restore. Later that afternoon, Marcus Reed found him standing near one of the courthouse windows overlooking the Chicago River. "You always disappear after hearings." Michael smiled faintly. "I like quiet." Marcus handed him a sealed envelope. "Department recommendation." Michael opened it. Inside was a formal nomination for a Distinguished Public Service Award, recognizing his years coordinating the multi-agency investigation. He read the first paragraph, then closed the folder. Marcus watched him. "Well," Michael handed it back, "I appreciate the recommendation. But I'd rather decline." Marcus laughed softly. "I knew you were going to say that. I was doing my job. You did a little more than that." Michael shook his head. "A lot of people did." Marcus leaned against the window. "Most of them weren't thrown into a thunderstorm by the people they were quietly investigating." Michael looked toward the river. "That wasn't the important part." Marcus smiled. "It was memorable." "Maybe. But the documents mattered. The witnesses mattered. The system mattered." Marcus nodded. "That's exactly why you deserve it." Michael changed the subject. "How are the restitution teams progressing?" Marcus laughed. You really don't make this easy." "No, you don't." Back at the Caldwell estate, federal asset managers continued their inventory. The mansion no longer resembled the symbol of influence it had once been. Paintings had been cataloged, vehicles photographed, corporate records removed. Several rooms stood nearly empty. Only furniture remained. Catherine walked slowly through the library, where her father had once entertained governors and executives. The hidden room behind the bookshelf now stood open. Its shelves were empty. Only dust remained. She remembered believing this room represented success. Now it reminded her how easily appearances could conceal something entirely different. Linda, the longtime housekeeper, entered, carrying a small cardboard box. "I found these while cleaning." Catherine looked inside. Old family photographs, birthday cards, holiday decorations. Near the bottom rested a simple insulated travel mug, blue, slightly scratched. Michael's. He had forgotten it months earlier. Catherine carefully picked it up. She remembered giving it to him during their second Christmas together. He had used it almost every day. She wondered why such a small object suddenly felt heavier than everything else in the room. Not because of its value, because it reminded her how often she had overlooked quiet acts of consistency while admiring louder displays of success. She gently placed the mug back into the box. Across town, Michael finished another ordinary workday. His desk looked exactly as it always had. The legal pad, the aligned pencils, the framed quotation, nothing suggested that one of the largest investigations of his career had officially concluded. Jason Miller stopped beside his desk. "I heard the verdict." Michael nodded. "So did I." Jason smiled. "A few of us are getting dinner after work." Michael looked up. "You should come." Months earlier, Jason would never have extended the invitation. Not out of cruelty, simply because he had never taken time to know the quiet man in the next cubicle. Michael considered it. "All right." Jason grinned. "Great." As he walked away, Michael returned to organizing several transportation compliance reports due the following morning. Life rarely paused after major events. Bills still arrived. Meetings still filled calendars. Coffee still needed brewing before sunrise. Perhaps that was what he appreciated most. The investigation had never been about becoming someone different. It had simply required remaining the same person through years of pressure. Late that evening, his phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. He answered. Michael Gibson. Several seconds passed before a familiar voice spoke quietly. Michael? It was Catherine. I know I don't deserve your time. He remained silent. I only want to ask one question. Michael listened. Would you meet me once? He looked through the office window toward the lights of downtown Chicago. Months earlier, anger might have answered for him. Now only reflection remained. Finally, he spoke. One conversation. Nothing more. Thank you, Catherine whispered. After the call ended, Michael slipped the phone back into his pocket. Some chapters ended with verdicts. Others required conversations that should have happened years earlier. He knew the next meeting would not change the past, but it might finally allow both of them to leave it behind. 3 days later, Michael arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe overlooked the DuPage River in Naperville, far from downtown Chicago, far from the courthouse, and even farther from the Caldwell estate. It was a quiet place where conversations blended into the sound of espresso machines and soft jazz playing through ceiling speakers. He chose a small table near the window. The same habit, always facing the entrance, not because he expected danger, because he preferred seeing people arrive. A server approached. Coffee. Black, please, she smiled. Anything else? No, thank you. Michael removed nothing from his briefcase except a small notebook. He didn't open it. He simply rested one hand on its cover while watching autumn leaves drift across the river. At exactly 2 o'clock, Catherine walked through the front door. She hesitated after spotting him. For a moment, she looked like someone considering turning around. Instead, she took a slow breath and crossed the room. She wore a simple gray sweater, dark jeans, and no jewelry except her wedding ring. It caught Michael's attention immediately, not because it remained on her hand, because he realized he was no longer wearing his. He had placed it in a drawer months earlier. Neither of them mentioned it. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. Michael stood. You wanted to talk. They sat. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. The server returned. Catherine ordered tea. When they were finally alone again, she folded both hands around the warm cup. I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times. Michael waited, and every version sounded wrong. He nodded slightly. Real conversations usually do. She managed the faintest smile. That sounds like you. Another pause. She looked down at the table. I spent months trying to figure out the exact moment everything fell apart. Michael remained silent. I thought it was the night my family pushed you out of the house. She slowly shook her head. But it wasn't. No. His voice was calm. It wasn't. She looked at him. When was it? Michael answered after a long moment. It didn't happen all at once. She listened carefully. It happened in small pieces. He looked out the window toward the river. The first time someone made a joke at my expense. The first time you stayed quiet. The first time I pretended it didn't matter. He turned back toward her. Then another dinner. Another comment. Another decision. He spoke without anger. Eventually, those small moments became normal. Catherine felt tears gathering. I didn't see it. I know. I should have. You should have. Neither sentence carried accusation, only truth. She wiped one eye before continuing. I kept telling myself your silence meant you weren't hurt. Michael smiled sadly. My silence meant I was trying to protect our marriage. She closed her eyes. I thought you didn't care what they said. I cared. Then why didn't you fight back? Michael looked down at his coffee. Because fighting every dinner wouldn't have changed anyone. She whispered, maybe it would have changed me. He didn't answer. She already knew. After another long silence, Catherine reached into her purse. She placed something on the table, the blue insulated travel mug. Michael looked at it. I found it while they were emptying the house. He picked it up carefully. The scratches were still there. So was the small dent near the bottom from when he had accidentally dropped it years earlier, while loading groceries into the truck. I couldn't throw it away. She smiled through tears. You used it every morning. I still would have. He turned the mug slowly in his hands. So many things I gave you. She paused. I forgot about. You didn't forget. He looked at her gently. You stopped noticing. Her shoulders dropped. That's worse? Michael didn't disagree. Outside, a pair of ducks crossed the slow-moving river. Neither of them spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Catherine asked the question she had carried for months. Did you ever stop loving me? Michael answered honestly. No. She looked surprised. No. I didn't stop. He took another sip of coffee. But love isn't always enough. She nodded slowly. I understand that now. He continued. Trust disappears differently. It leaves quietly. Usually long before anyone notices. She covered her face briefly with both hands. I'm sorry. I know. No, she lowered her hands. I mean really sorry. For every time I stayed silent. For every time I laughed because everyone else did. For asking you to buy expensive suits instead of asking whether you were happy. Her voice trembled. I chose appearances. Michael looked at her steadily. Yes. I chose my family. Yes. I chose comfort. Yes. The words hurt because they were true. Not because he said them harshly. He never did. After several moments, Catherine asked, Is there anything I can do? Michael thought carefully before answering. There are things you can do. Hope briefly appeared in her eyes. But not for us. The hope faded. You can build a different life. You can become someone who notices quiet people. Someone who speaks when everyone else stays silent. He rested one hand on the old travel mug. If you do that, then none of this will have been completely wasted. She nodded. Tears rolled freely now. I wish I'd understood you years ago. So do I. Again, no anger, only regret. She reached into another folder. I signed the papers. Michael accepted the envelope. The divorce documents, every page already completed. Only his signature remained. He reviewed them carefully, not because he doubted her, because careful habits never disappeared. When he finished, he signed each required page. The sound of the pen seemed unusually loud. Neither of them spoke while he placed the papers back inside the envelope. It's done, Catherine whispered. Yes. She removed her wedding ring. She looked at it for several seconds before placing it beside her empty teacup. I kept thinking if I left it on. She smiled weakly. Maybe something would change. Michael looked at the ring. Sometimes we hold on to symbols after this meaning has already gone. She nodded. I think I knew that. The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, filling the cafe with warm light. The storm that had begun everything months earlier felt impossibly distant now. As they stood to leave, Catherine hesitated. Can I ask one last question? Michael waited. Were you ever angry? He considered the question longer than any other she had asked. Yes. She lowered her eyes. But not because your family underestimated me. She looked back up. I was angry because I believed we were supposed to stand beside each other. His voice remained gentle. And that stopped happening long before the storm. She nodded slowly. I understand. They walked toward the entrance together. Outside, the cool afternoon air carried the scent of fallen leaves. At the parking lot, they stopped beside Michael's faded blue pickup. She smiled softly. You still have it. It still works. She laughed through lingering tears. Some things really never change. He smiled. Some things shouldn't. She extended her hand. Instead of shaking it, Michael embraced her briefly. Not as husband and wife, not as strangers, simply as two people saying goodbye to a chapter neither could rewrite. When they stepped apart, Catherine whispered, "I hope you find peace." "I already have." She watched him climb into the pickup. The familiar engine started on the first turn. As Michael drove away, she remained standing in the quiet parking lot until the truck disappeared beyond the trees. 2 weeks later, Michael accepted a temporary assignment with a federal interagency compliance task force based in Northern Virginia. He packed only what he needed: the same briefcase, the same notebooks, the same travel mug, the same old pickup truck. Chicago had given him many memories, some painful, some meaningful. Now another road waited ahead, and for the first time in many years, nothing behind him was asking him to turn back. Northern Virginia greeted Michael with clear skies and crisp autumn mornings. The assignment was scheduled to last 9 months. He rented a modest brick townhouse in Alexandria, less than 20 minutes from the federal offices where the Interagency Compliance Task Force operated. The neighborhood was quiet. Early each morning, runners crossed the nearby trails, dog walkers exchanged polite greetings, and local cafes opened before sunrise. It suited him. He had never needed much space. He only needed peace. On his first Monday, Michael parked the same faded blue pickup in the employee garage. A young security officer glanced at the truck before checking his identification. "Good morning, Mr. Gibson." "Good morning." "Welcome to Virginia." "Thank you." The office itself was different from Chicago. Instead of focusing primarily on transportation compliance, this task force coordinated procurement oversight across several federal agencies. Experienced investigators filled the hallways: accountants, attorneys, auditors, digital forensic specialists. Most introductions were brief. No one seemed interested in titles. They cared about competence. At 8:30, the division director entered the conference room. Rebecca Collins had spent more than 25 years investigating government contracting fraud. She welcomed the new arrivals without ceremony. "Everyone here has impressive resumes." She looked around the room. "They matter very little." Several people smiled. "The work you're about to do will define your reputation far more than anything already written about you." Michael appreciated her approach. It reminded him of something his father had once said. "You earn trust one decision at a time." After the meeting, Rebecca stopped beside him. "I've heard a great deal about your work in Illinois." Michael answered politely. "Most of the credit belongs to a large team." "I expected that answer." She smiled. "They also told me you'd say something like that." The following weeks settled into a comfortable rhythm. Morning briefings, case reviews, compliance assessments, interagency coordination. The work demanded concentration rather than attention. Exactly the environment Michael preferred. One afternoon, Rebecca introduced him to a group of newly hired investigators. "They've completed training." "They haven't completed experience." She looked toward Michael. "I'd like you to mentor them." Michael hesitated. "I've never really taught." "You've been teaching for years." "How?" "By example." He accepted the assignment. The first mentoring session took place in a small classroom overlooking the Potomac River. 8 investigators sat around a large conference table. Most were under 30, eager, confident, curious. Michael began without slides, without prepared speeches. He placed a plain manila folder in the center of the table. "What do you think is inside?" One investigator answered immediately. "Evidence." Another guessed. "Financial records." A third smiled. "Probably a test." Michael opened the folder. Inside were only blank sheets of paper. Several people looked confused. He folded his hands. "The most dangerous thing in any investigation." he paused, "is assuming you already know what's inside before you open the folder." The room became quiet. Never investigate your expectations. Investigate the facts. The lesson stayed with them long after the meeting ended. Months passed. Michael gradually became known throughout the office for habits that never changed. He arrived first, left his workspace cleaner than he found it, returned phone calls, answered questions patiently, never raised his voice. One evening, a young investigator named Ethan Parker knocked gently on his office door. "Do you have a minute?" Michael looked up from his paperwork. "Of course." Ethan entered, carrying several procurement files. "I think I found something." Michael motioned toward the chair. "Tell me." For nearly 20 minutes, Ethan explained inconsistencies involving vendor certifications. When he finished, Michael asked only one question. "What evidence supports your conclusion?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't have enough yet." Michael nodded. "Then you don't have a conclusion." The younger investigator looked disappointed. "I thought," Michael smiled, "you have a lead." "That's valuable. But never confuse a lead with proof." Ethan slowly smiled. "I'll keep digging." "Good." As Ethan left the office, Rebecca Collins happened to pass by. "You didn't give him the answer." Michael shook his head. "He'll remember the lesson longer if he finds it himself." She nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that." Outside work life became wonderfully ordinary. On Saturday mornings, Michael visited a local farmer's market. He bought fresh vegetables from the same vendors. He learned their names. One elderly couple always reserved fresh tomatoes because they knew he arrived around 9. He attended a small neighborhood church where few people knew anything about his past. To them, he was simply Michael, the quiet man who always helped stack chairs after community breakfasts. He preferred it that way. One December afternoon, after months of renting, Michael met with a real estate agent. Not to purchase a large house, not to celebrate success. Simply because he wanted a permanent place to call home. The property was modest. 3 bedrooms, a small front porch, an old maple tree shading the backyard. The kitchen needed updating. The fence leaned slightly. The roof had recently been replaced. The agent apologized. "It isn't luxury." Michael smiled. "I wasn't looking for luxury." He walked slowly through each room. Natural light entered through wide windows. The neighborhood children rode bicycles along quiet streets. Someone nearby was decorating for Christmas. It felt peaceful. 2 weeks later, he signed the closing documents. When he received the keys, there were no photographers, no celebration, only a handshake. That evening, he carried the first box inside himself. Books, coffee mugs, a few framed photographs of his parents. The blue insulated travel mug rested on the kitchen counter while he unpacked. He stood quietly in the empty living room. The silence felt different from the silence that had once filled the Caldwell mansion. This silence carried possibility, not loneliness. Spring arrived early. The maple tree outside the front porch filled with green leaves. Neighbors gradually introduced themselves. Mrs. Alvarez from next door brought homemade cookies. Across the street, retired Marine Sergeant William Carter helped Michael repair part of the backyard fence. Nobody asked what kind of car he should drive. Nobody cared what brand of watch he wore. Conversations revolved around weather gardening football and whose turn it was to host the neighborhood barbecue. Michael found himself smiling more often. Not because life had suddenly become perfect, because it had become uncomplicated. One afternoon, Rebecca Collins stopped by his office carrying an official envelope. "I have another assignment." Michael accepted it. Inside was a formal invitation. National Ethics and Public Integrity Conference, Washington, D.C. keynote speaker. Rebecca watched him read. "You'll be opening the conference." Michael looked surprised. "I usually avoid public speaking." "I know. They specifically requested you." He read the invitation again. The conference would bring together federal investigators, state auditors, inspectors, general prosecutors, ethics officers, and compliance professionals from across the country. Thousands were expected to attend. Rebecca smiled. "You've spent your career teaching people one at a time." She tapped the invitation. "Now you get to teach a few more." Michael folded the letter carefully. He looked through his office window toward the Washington skyline in the distance. For years, people had underestimated him because they measured success through appearances. Now, the recognition arriving at his door had nothing to do with wealth status or influence. It had been earned quietly, one careful decision after another. He placed the invitation inside his briefcase before switching off the office lights. The speech was still weeks away. He hadn't written a single word, but he already knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not speak about himself. He would speak about integrity, because long after every investigation ended, that was the only thing capable of surviving every storm. The ballroom overlooked the Potomac River. Morning sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting across polished wood floors and rows of neatly arranged chairs. More than 1,000 people filled the National Ethics and Public Integrity Conference that morning. Federal investigators, state auditors, inspectors general, assistant United States attorneys, compliance officers, university researchers, young recruits attending their first national conference, veterans nearing retirement. Each person carried a different title. Each had chosen a profession built on the same quiet principle. The truth mattered. Michael stood behind the stage curtain with a single sheet of paper folded inside his jacket pocket. Rebecca Collins walked over. "You still only have one page." Michael smiled. "It's enough," she laughed. "Everyone else brought 30-slide presentations." "I don't think they came to see slides." "No." She looked toward the stage. "I think they came to hear your story." Michael gently shook his head. "I hope they leave remembering something more useful than that." A stage coordinator approached. "Mr. Gibson." "Yes." "We're ready?" He thanked her and walked toward the podium. The applause began before he reached the microphone. It lasted longer than he expected. When the room finally became quiet, he looked across the audience. For several seconds, he said nothing. He simply let the silence settle. Then he spoke. "Good morning." His voice carried naturally through the room. "I've spent most of my career helping investigate documents." A few people smiled. "That probably sounds less exciting than it appears on television." Light laughter spread through the audience. "I've learned something after many years." He paused. "Documents never become dishonest." "People do." The room grew quiet again. Michael rested both hands on the podium. "When I first entered this profession, I believed the most important skill was finding evidence." He looked around the ballroom. "I was wrong." Another pause. "The most important skill is protecting your judgment while you're looking for it." Several attendees began taking notes. "You will investigate people who are wealthy. You will investigate people who are powerful. You will also investigate people who appear completely ordinary." He smiled faintly. "Your responsibility is to treat every one of them exactly the same." He spoke without dramatic gestures, without raising his voice. Every sentence carried the same calm rhythm that had guided him throughout his career. Never assume someone is honest because they're respected. Never assume someone is dishonest because they're overlooked. Evidence deserves better than assumptions. He reached into his jacket pocket. The audience expected prepared remarks. Instead, he removed the old stainless steel watch that Brandon Caldwell had once mocked during the family dinner. He placed it gently on the podium. "I've worn this watch for many years." Several people leaned forward. "It has never impressed anyone." A few quiet smiles appeared. "It wasn't designed to." He glanced down at it. "It simply keeps accurate time." He looked back toward the audience. Integrity works the same way. It doesn't ask for attention. It simply continues doing its job. The ballroom remained completely silent. Near the back of the room, a young investigator slowly lowered his phone, choosing to listen instead of recording. Michael continued. Several years ago, someone asked me why I never replaced this watch. He smiled briefly. I answered that it still worked. He let that sentence rest for a moment. I've discovered that the same answer applies to principles. If honesty still works, if patience still works, if fairness still works, so don't replace them with something louder. Applause broke out. It wasn't overwhelming, it was genuine. Michael waited until the room became quiet once more. I'd like to leave you with one final thought. He looked across the audience one last time. There will be days when no one notices your work. There will be months when careful preparation feels invisible. There will be moments when other people mistake your silence for weakness. He smiled. Let them. Several people exchanged thoughtful glances. Your responsibility is not to win every argument. It's to be ready when the facts are finally asked to speak. He stepped away from the podium. The applause rose again, longer this time, not because he had delivered a dramatic speech, because he had described something everyone in the room had experienced. The conference concluded later that afternoon. Attendees lined up to shake his hand. Most conversations lasted only a few seconds. Thank you. I needed to hear that. I'll remember what you said. Michael thanked each person in return. He never hurried anyone. Late in the afternoon, he quietly left through a side entrance instead of the main lobby where reporters had gathered. Outside, the spring air felt warm. He crossed the parking lot toward the same faded blue pickup truck. Its paint had faded a little more. The driver's seat carried the familiar crease from years of use. He placed his briefcase on the passenger seat. The old insulated travel mug rested in the cup holder. He smiled. Some things truly never needed replacing. Before starting the engine, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus Reed. Congratulations. Couldn't have said it better myself. Michael typed a brief reply. Safe travels. Talk soon. Nothing more. He placed the phone down and started the truck. The engine came to life immediately. As he drove away from Washington, the skyline slowly disappeared in the rearview mirror. The highway stretched ahead beneath a clear blue sky. For a moment, his thoughts returned to that storm outside the Caldwell estate. Cold rain, lightning across the driveway. 10 black SUVs emerging through the darkness. At the time, many people would have believed those vehicles represented power. They didn't. They represented preparation, years of disciplined work, thousands of ordinary decisions made correctly, millions of pages reviewed patiently, hundreds of conversations carefully documented. The convoy had never come because one man was important. It had come because the truth had finally become impossible to ignore. Michael rolled down the driver's window. Fresh air filled the cab. Traffic moved steadily toward Northern Virginia. He had no desire to relive the past. Richard Caldwell would spend the remainder of his life facing the consequences of his choices. Brandon would have years to reflect on arrogance that had once seemed like confidence. Ryan Harper would rebuild whatever remained of his future. Catherine would build a quieter life, carrying lessons she had learned too late to save her marriage, but not too late to shape the rest of her life. Michael wished none of them harm. Justice had already done what revenge never could. It had placed responsibility exactly where it belonged. As the afternoon sun settled lower over the highway, the old pickup continued forward at an unhurried pace. No convoy followed behind him now. No cameras waited ahead. Only another ordinary evening. And for Michael Gibson, after everything that had happened, an ordinary evening was one of the greatest rewards life could offer. Some people spend their lives trying to appear powerful, while others quietly spend their time becoming dependable. Those two paths may look similar from a distance, but they lead to very different destinations. Michael never defeated arrogance by shouting louder or seeking revenge. He trusted preparation, remained patient when he was underestimated, and allowed facts to carry the weight that emotions never could. Most of us will never coordinate a federal investigation or stand in a courtroom, but we all face moments when our character is judged by appearances instead of truth. In those moments, it helps to remember that real integrity is built through small, consistent choices that nobody applauds. Those choices become our strongest foundation when difficult days arrive. If this story reminded you of a time when someone underestimated you, or when patience ultimately proved stronger than anger, I would genuinely love to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments, and let others know what lesson stayed with you the longest. And if you enjoy stories where quiet strength, perseverance, and truth ultimately prevail, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story explores another unforgettable moment when appearances hide a far deeper reality.